Welcome to Storytime. Enjoy with me. Open Doors. Kathy Paige, the Queen of Radio Interviews. Part 3.
When Kathy finally left the hospital, it was as if she were leaving home for the first time. She was nervous but excited, and her heart felt light as she opened the door to leave. Of course, all the newspapers were soon full of the story. American surgeon gives sight to blind woman. The gift of sight. Kathy Paige can see. Brilliant American doctor performs miracle operation. Woodrow Percival had tried to keep things quiet, at least until he was sure that Kathy had recovered fully from the operation. But he couldn't stop the news from spreading any more than he could stop the sun from rising. Soon he had film companies wanting to make a movie about him, publishers wanting his life story, and a long line of newspapers and magazines wanting interviews. The scientific community wanted to honor him, while businessmen saw many ways of marketing his ideas. Dr. Woodrow Percival's future was looking very bright indeed. Kathy wanted to rest at home. There was plenty for her to do there. For the first time in her life, she could actually see her most valued possessions. Best of all, she could see her friends for the first time. And, of course, her dear dog, Trudy, who had had to stay at home while she had been away. Kathy discovered that the human face had a powerful effect on her feelings. It was as if there had been a great hunger in her life that had been so much a part of her that she had never questioned it. Not until now. She had never before realized what a smile looked like, and it often moved her to tears to see her friends smiling. Then there was her taste in clothing. Before, she had always had to depend on the judgments of others to provide her with clothes that felt comfortable but looked smart. When she looked in her wardrobe, she saw nothing but dark colors or pale things that looked like they had no color at all. "They've got to go," she said, as she took some of the clothes out and threw them onto the floor. She was determined that from now on she would only wear clothes that were in colors she liked. After all, she could now decide for herself what clothes she could wear. She arranged to go shopping with Carla, her agent, the very next day. Trudy came too. Kathy had still not fully learned how to judge distances very well, and Trudy was almost as useful to her now as she had been before. Kathy enjoyed choosing her new clothes. She was surprised at how good she looked in them. It was a feeling she liked. As Kathy was paying for them, Carla, who had a particular interest in fashion, said, "Well, Kathy, you've certainly brightened up your wardrobe now. I like the new look. It suits you." Kathy had bought clothing that was food for her eyes. Her clothes had always been rather dull before, more than she had realized. These new clothes were colorful and cheerful. They made her feel happy. Kathy found that she was watching a lot of television. She had never really bothered with it before. Now she watched it with deep interest. Quiz and game show presenters and singers smiled all the time against a background of bright colors. Their smiles made them seem to be such lovely, honest people. Yet on the few occasions she had listened to such shows before her operation, she had thought they sounded stupid and shallow. It was confusing, but she was almost too happy to care. Almost. Kathy discovered that she could now dream in color, and with pictures too. Before this, her dreams were made of sounds, voices, and music. Now she could also see in her dreams, and she was delighted. She took up photography and loved to see how pictures from life could be caught by the camera, like frozen pieces of memory. The next thing to do was to go to a museum with Carla to see paintings by great artists, just as she had always wanted. She could hardly wait. Kathy was used to getting up early. She loved the colours of the early morning, and she planned to visit as many London museums as she could during the day. By 8:30 in the morning, she had had her breakfast and was dressed and ready to leave. The doorbell rang. Kathy went to the door. She was expecting to see Carla, but it wasn't Carla. It was a young man who was smiling at her. He had a nice smile, she thought. "Hello, Miss Paige. We've met before. You may remember me from the television studios. My name is Mick Dean." Kathy had not been to a studio since before her operation. She had decided to take at least 1 year off work, no matter how the operation turned out. She had been thinking of writing a book about her life. It would be a challenge, and she liked challenges. But now she had a new challenge. Mick Dean had given her a television show of her own to present. He had wanted her to do it so much, he had told her, that he just had to talk to her himself, and that was exactly what he had done. He had just turned up at her door. It was totally unexpected. She probably would not have spoken to him otherwise. Kathy decided she liked him for it. She had never really taken much notice of Mick Dean before. In fact, she remembered that he had sounded far too sure of himself for her liking. But she must have been mistaken. He had offered her her own show where she could interview people in the news. He had looked so honest and enthusiastic about it that she thought she really ought to give the show a chance. And he had such a nice smile. His teeth were lovely and white, apart from the shiny gold one at the side, which was rather attractive. And his eyes! She had never realized that eyes could be so colourful. His eyes were a lovely blue, with a few fine little red lines around the white parts. Kathy decided she would do the show, just one, to see what it was like. 3 months later, the show was ready and about to start. Kathy had soon got used to all the things that went on in a television studio. All the lights, the people who were needed to make sure everything worked right, and, of course, the excited studio audience waiting for the show to begin. Kathy was behind the scenes, wearing her new cheerful clothes and drinking a cup of tea. She was reading Braille notes with her fingertips. It was still quicker than trying to read written notes about her first guest, an aging actor called Archie Mason. He had written a book about his life, in which he had told his readers all about his wives, his lovers, and the famous actors he had known. He had given away a great many details about their private lives and the kinds of things they did. This had, of course, guaranteed big sales of his book. Kathy was sure that much of what he had written wasn't true, and her aim in the interview was to make him admit it. When the show began, Kathy was given a warm welcome. The audience was glad to see her back, though there were a few surprised looks at her colourful choice of dress. Archie Mason was introduced, and he made his entrance. He was a man in late middle age, with dark hair, a moustache, and dressed in a smart blue suit with a red tie and white shirt. He was still handsome, and knew it as he smiled at the audience with his perfect white teeth, waving and showing an expensive gold watch on his wrist. He then turned his smile to Kathy as he gave her a kiss on the cheek before sitting down. "He has a nice smile," Kathy thought as she looked at his perfectly shaped teeth. She liked to see things that were bright and evenly shaped. Kathy at once started to question Archie Mason about some of the more doubtful details of his book.
"I swear to you, Kathy, that nothing in my book is untrue. Honest,"
said Archie, as he smiled and showed his white teeth. Kathy's ears were hearing a voice that did not sound honest at all, but her eyes saw a big, warm smile that looked open and truthful. Her brain listened to her ears, but her heart looked at the smile. It was hard to believe that a man with a smile like that could ever lie. For the first time during a live interview, she doubted her judgment. She decided to believe him. From that moment on, she was no longer sure of her own judgment. To the audience, it seemed as if Archie was the one in control, not Kathy. So long as he gave her a big smile, he could say whatever he liked. Kathy simply nodded and said, "Yes," and "Really?" to him. This was not what the audience expected. Where was the Kathy Paige they knew? She should have known right away how to deal with a self-important old fool like this. Her next guest was a politician who had broken some of his election promises. At least everybody thought she would sort him out. He was more like what she was used to. But the politician had been prepared well. He had a boyish look, though he was well over 40. But most of all, he had a nice smile. She didn't know what to think of all the different signals she was getting from this man. His voice told her not to trust him, while his smile told her he was honest. She could no longer trust her judgment. She felt confused. The politician said almost anything he wanted. Kathy knew she should have been asking more questions, but she just didn't have the confidence in her abilities anymore. She was too slow, and the politician was too quick. After the show, Kathy knew she had done badly. She felt terrible. She was not surprised when she heard, not long afterwards, that her show would not be put on again. She heard no more from Mick Dean. Kathy finally found the time to write her autobiography. She began it soon after her appearance on television. It took her almost a year, but it became a huge success and made her a lot of money. Once again, she was in public demand. Because of her renewed popularity, she was asked by a different producer to make another television show. She turned down the offer. She didn't want to go through that again. Instead, she decided to return to radio, and soon her old show was back. Kathy wanted to show her fans that she was as good as ever. As her first guest, she chose the politician she had interviewed during her disastrous television show. Naturally, he expected an easy time of it again. He smiled as he looked at Kathy across the table. He didn't smile for long. "Could you tell us, Minister, about your promise to reduce unemployment?" she asked him. The minister began. "Of course, Kathy, but you must realize these things take a long time." "Oh, really? That's not what you said last month." She then went on to tear him apart, taking each of his promises in turn and showing how they had all been broken, He was, before a listening audience of millions, shown to be false and dishonest, just as she had first thought. This was what her listeners had been waiting for. As the politician left, Cathy sat back and took off the black scarf she had tied around her head to cover her eyes throughout the interview. Cathy Paige, the queen of radio interviews and star of her listeners, was back.